Okay, science communication. So, when scientists are able to communicate effectively beyond their peers to broader non-scientist audiences, it A, builds support for science, which is so important right now. B, it promotes understanding of its wider relevance to society. And C, encourages more informed decision making at all levels, from government to communities to individuals, which of course is also absolutely critical right now. It can also make science accessible to audiences that traditionally have been excluded from the process of science and help make science more diverse and inclusive. It is not just my humble opinion. It is an opinion shared by most, I would say, that science communication is one of the core professional skills that every science student and professional should have. Okay, so science communication is increasingly, science itself is increasingly interdisciplinary. Let me try that again. Science itself is increasingly interdisciplinary. In fact, the big, important, wicked problems that we face right now, like climate change, require an interdisciplinary approach. The ability to communicate effectively across disciplines fosters collaboration and innovation. Being able to communicate the relevance and impact of your ideas and discoveries enhances your ability to secure funding or find jobs. And excellent science communication can capture the imagination. It sparks meaningful debates and discussions that are going to help secure the place of science in our society and make it more commonplace, normalize science in our everyday lives. Researchers need the capability to explain their work to others. There is a need to push to make science consistently open and accessible to the public. And, there's the kind of added bonus that it might increase the mutual respect between scientists and society at large, make science more approachable and digestible. But it's going to require a radical attitude shift towards science communication, really valuing the skills that are required to make efficient and effective science communications. So that's supported by the idea that science is a social activity. We rely on each other for information and ideas. You want to be able to persuade your peers that you are a reliable and successful producer of knowledge. You want to be taken seriously. And peer review is a critical component of the scientific process, which is why I want you guys to share your maps every once in a while and think about how you're communicating your results to other people. One tool that you can use to make science communication more engaging is to use elements from storytelling. Storytelling can help create movement and momentum in your presentation of data. And you're familiar with this, beginnings, middles, ends, whether there's a climax or an issue that has to be overcome in the middle of the story, and then, happy resolutions. And while these common narrative structures typically include a starting point to set up the scene, some action that leads to a crisis or complication, and then a solution or discovery that leads to a happy ending, think about kind of tossing that on its head and opening with your results. The IMRAD format is typically introduction, background, methods, and then results. But if you open with the results, it's a great way to engage your audience right up front. Tell them the most important thing, even though it might seem like you're starting a story with, it was a dark and stormy night and the butler did it. That might seem counterintuitive to lay that information out in the first paragraph and then spend the rest of the book kind of talking about how the murder went down, backing the other way. But people don't approach scientific charts and plots and maps and story maps and journal articles the same way they might engage with or devote time to sitting down with a good book. We don't want to be entertained. We want to be engaged and inspired, right? So you want to be efficient and engaging and make it easy for your audience to get to the important information right away. If they're still interested, then they're going to spend more time, look deeper into your story to get the supporting or background information, right? Yay. Okay, data story genres. Data stories or narratives can be told from a variety of angles, and the angle you choose depends on what you want the data to show, how you want to show it to your audience, and how you want it to sort of unfold. So here are just a couple examples. Narrating change over time. So you might have a data set, and this goes beyond just the assignment for this week, but you might have the general theme of your story might be to show how something has changed over time, land use or park use or populations or something, habitats. You can start big and drill down. Maybe you have a global data set of educational attainment by gender, by country. You could look at global patterns and then focus on a continent and then drill down even more to compare rates of one specific target country. Or you could do the opposite by starting small and zooming out, and that's going to do the opposite. Connect your audience to a small location, to an individual country, to use the same example, and then show that country's attainment rates relative to the larger region or the continent, and then move on to how that relates to the global rates. Highlighting contrasts, if you think about it geographically, maybe you have a freedom index of all the countries around the world, like how free or not free a country is. Globally, you would see that the top 10 freest countries are all in Europe, while the 10 least free countries are kind of spread around in different geographic regions. That sets up something interesting for your audience, and then you can kind of focus on that geographic context, that pattern that you're seeing. Or you could use like a gender gap in human development, comparing males to females. So highlighting contrasts between groups, whether it's data, or geographic. Dissecting factors, focusing on the components of your topic and looking at the potential drivers of the patterns you see. So pulling it apart. And then my personal favorite is profiling the outliers. Where you might look for the deviations from the spatial patterns that you see and draw attention to those outliers. And then you might even go on and dissect the factors that might be driving those outliers. So some basic rules for effective science communication. Number one is know your audience. Figure out who you're trying to create this communication for. Are you talking about your peers, the public, stakeholders that might have some background information, people that you need to convince of something, or are you just trying to educate? Identifying your audience first is going to guide the language that you use, the level of detail, and the focus of your output, which leads us to number two, which is to identify the goals of the communication. Are you intending to educate, to advocate, to raise awareness, build trust, influence policy, encourage change, be part of a dialogue? There are a lot of different goals that you might have. The goals are going to guide the decisions that you make about what to include and what to leave out in your, whether it's a presentation or the story map or a specific plot or chart. Number three, lead with the most important information. So this is kind of what I was talking about during the story narrative. This does go against intuition in the way that we've been taught to write scientific papers. The intro, background, methods, then results. Flip that around and put the interesting stuff right up front. Studies have shown that stakeholders tend to absorb information in the opposite order than we typically lay things out in the IMRAD format. So put your key findings first, and then the so what that explains why the findings matter, and then the supporting details that led to those key findings. Okay, number four, no jargon. That should be pretty self-explanatory. It should relate to number one, who's your audience, and it should also relate to number five, be relatable. Humanize your material. Use specific examples that people can relate to. Number six, use visuals. That should be a duh. It's a GIS class, make maps. Don't be afraid to use histograms. Use tables to summarize results or to organize results in a really clean, approachable way. Use bullet points. There are a lot of different types of visuals, including colorful headers that separate portions of the page, or maybe you've got a special section that kind of deviates from the narrative. You might use like a colored fill for that section of your, let's say, story map to show your audience that that sets apart a little bit and that kind of it's a break in the narration. And then finally, keep it short, simple, and straightforward. Consider sticking to 3 main points and then use those as a framework to sort of edit out other things that become superfluous to your main message. So how to get started? Start with thinking about telling the story in front of an audience. Write a narrative and pretend you're talking to somebody that might not know anything about this topic to start with. That could be even before you identify who your main audience is. Act like a tour guide, and you'll hear yourself focusing on the things that are the most important. Write those down. Then kind of clarify those main plot points. And of course, use graphics to drive the narrative. So look at the graphics you have, but you may need to create new ones to help tell this story. And then finally, just as a recap, ask yourself, who's my audience? And then double check your story map. Does it jive with, is it consistent, I guess, with who your audience is? And then ask yourself, why is this issue important to that audience? And then why am I interested in the topic? And those two things should be woven together, and make sure you're covering these things and these things in your narrative, and then kind of gear them in the words that you choose and the level of detail that you go into to your audience. And then remember to focus on key messages, 3 or less, and make sure that that's what's coming through in your story.